share such a deep intellectual connection with Jen and Suzanne that some of what I'm saying might actually resonate with what they said earlier. In fact, may directly repeat it, but may even have one slide that is exactly the same as theirs. So here goes, and let's hope that just the time that's elapsed will make it all seem new and fresh to you. So I'm going to talk about why they love to hate women in games, and I'm going to come up with a why. And also show some of the many ways in which they love to hate women in games. So, what was Women in Games? Emma and I were both part of this organisation. Jen and Suzanne at various times have been our keynotes. It was launched in 2004. There's a funny pixelation happening on the screen, so maybe don't look at it. Maybe just listen to my beautiful voice. Because it started to give me, or maybe it's me, but that was leading to a migraine. It's there, yeah. Unusually, the originator of Women in Games UK was actually a man, Mark Isles. And you'll see from the key aims of the organisation that it had this explicitly industry-oriented focus, because at that time, a lot of us, deeply naively, believed that actually you could just add women and stir, and that would create some of the changes that were necessary. In fact, many of us had worked on excavating the fact that there were women out there, and that actually they were doing really amazing things, and the question was just to show them to the world, and everything would change. So what did we do? We ran some networking events, we ran an annual conference, and the members represented the issues raised through these activities to wider audiences. For example, Emma and I represented WIG at the Bird's Eye View conference, which is a feminist film, a gently feminist film festival that takes place in the UK in 2008. And that was, for me, a very, very interesting experience, which I'll maybe say a little bit more of as we go on, and depending how the time goes. We established some mentoring activities, and we sought to promote female access to technology-based courses across the UK. So a lot of different assumptions behind each of those that are about representing women in various spaces and places. Most successfully there was a conference that took place in Abertay, which is a university up in Aberdeen in Scotland, which used the conference to actually leverage some funding to support women's access to their games technology courses. And for the next 3 years, they saw a dramatic increase in the applications and the completion for those on those courses of young women. Sadly, it's all dropped away. So, Women in Games had an eclectic mix of perspectives with industry at the conferences, lots of fantastic representatives who were there who most likely would have said, I'm not a feminist but, and some of those were men, but they were explicitly engaged with our underpinning belief that actually women were capable of contributing to an important aspect of our bloodshed. We had representatives from advocacy groups, whether it was ELSPA, which was the European Leisure Software Providers Association, who were there at conferences, all the way through to other kinds of advocacy groups. We also had feminist academics from a range of perspectives, art practice, cultural studies, computer science, etc. And that kind of heteroglossia was really, really rich and very enriching for all the participants. There are a group of individuals who attended those conferences who've gone away, that fundamentally changed by those activities. It's not enough though. We also had representatives from certification bodies like the BBFC, who spoke at the Women in Games that Emma organised in Newport. A very, very interesting and educating perspective on just the way in which sex and violence gets treated in video games in such a way. So there were an evolving set of issues for us: the representation of women within specific games, representation of girls and women as gamers, and representation of women within development and design communities. Those were the kind of 3 prongs of the fork that we felt would stab the problem to death. And I think, for me, I had a very, very complex background, much like Jen and Suzanne's, where actually I came at it from feminism and technology, not really games. That was always my perspective. So I actually did a longitudinal study of female Quake players, who I did some very interesting, very feminist-informed ethnographic work with. If anybody wants to ask me about some of the challenges of including your participants step by step in the ethnographic process and the writing up process, and also playing with them when we relish playing, I can talk about that at length. And what I was particularly interested in was the way in which those women absolutely refuted the claim that there was a specifically hardwired gender difference in play preferences. What was also evident at the time, so this was, I was researching from the late 90s all the way through to 2003, was that at that time there was a proliferation of websites that were addressed at the girl gamers, the growl, which again, when none of them were ever articulating what, at any point the F word was never said, and yet they were fundamentally feminist in what they were undertaking and how they acted within the community. Always providing a place for women to come back and talk about their pleasure as gamers, and also to talk about their experience, and providing a forum. So I sort of felt like, because you didn't have to bang on about feminism to actually make a difference out there, that wasn't necessarily the drum to be banging. And it was very clear within women games that actually feminism continues to be a kind of an awkward identity to articulate. For example, at the panel at the Bird's Eye Film Festival, I really came off as some sort of humorless lesbian feminist, as I was categorised in the write-up about it, because of what I said in the panel, which was really a tiny little bit of the team, because what had seemed like it was going to be a panel that could be critical about what was happening in the industry, it became very clear that actually to occupy a critical perspective was slightly problematic. So there were two other female designers on the panel with us, Emma, and they were both kind of just celebrating the fact that it was all completely great and groovy for them in the industry, and they didn't have any problems. So don't bang on about those problems, and certainly don't criticise Dead on Arrival beach volleyball for the fact that there's lots of tits in it. You sanctimonious, humorless old crow. And then I also said the rather scandalous, stated a rather scandalous position that actually I'd rather there was hardcore sex in games that was clearly on the top shelf and for over 18s than to have Dead or Alive beach volleyball. And I explained why I had that position. He asked me, and he said, well, you just tweet Helen would rather have hardcore sex and increase my hit rate. I got a lot more followers then. Moving swiftly along. Women in Games International was launched in 2005, and I just wanted to put that up again because, again, the sort of particular focus is on the industry. That actually this is just about inclusivity within a particular domain, and that's where you need to target your energies. Although there are things like better work-life balance, healthy working conditions, etc., which remain kind of actually urgent concerns for women working in the industry. So these are not problematic positions. And so what I want to just kind of focus on is some of the ways in which sort of three different areas of kind of backlash against any activity that is explicitly targeted at improving the lot of women in games. And so we were due to hold a conference in February 2010, and it was cancelled due to low delegate numbers. I mean, in our own analysis of the reason that it had low delegate numbers is actually the recession, that a lot of people wanted to come, but they just couldn't afford it. But there was a lot of interesting response that I won't go into in very much detail because I know that other people are going to talk about the kinds of hate speech. But it starts off, the response kind of starts off with, oh, that's a bit of a shame, and I would quite like to go. They had poor marketing strategies, how much of the early comments sort of ran. And then they very quickly degenerated into exactly the sort of really problematic hate speech that comes up around the And what strikes me as really problematic, and you probably won't be able to read this, is this recurrent, I haven't had any experience of this, and neither has my girlfriend. So therefore, it doesn't exist and it's not important, and the issues are too small for them to concern us. And that's really kind of problematic. As anyone who's been involved in any kind of cultural activism, this is just a tiny kind of in-newsy example of exactly the sorts of problems that workers' unions face every day, that people have been facing when they try to do any kind of activist work. That issue has never affected me. Why the hell should I strike? Should I get out on the street? Should I do anything about it? And there are a sort of whole series of very, very problematic memes that come up in the feedback all the time, the comments. That's why I recommend that you don't turn on commenting straight away. Preserve yourself from it. And that's about women get what they deserve. You know, they deserve it in so many ways, this kind of hate speech, because of who they are, and I'll say a little bit more about that. But things have not got better, have they? We did all that work, that was 8 years ago, that Women Games was launched, and things have definitely not got that much better, or have they? Female games characters, there's some minor gains, but enduring stereotypes abound. We'll look to a little example of that Mass Effect in a minute. Female gamers are routinely subjected to sexual innuendo, mild to extreme harassment, and outrageous misogynistic forms of hate speech. And I know that there's a talk coming on later on about that ugly study, who are doing a fantastic job of just kind of archiving that for us, bringing it, not just archiving it, because that's just putting it away somewhere, but actually bringing it out into the world. And female designers, belittled, demeaned and marginalised, and that has been around since my research, actually, in the very late 90s and early 90s. There was a tremendous amount of exactly that. So the moment that you revealed that you were a woman, there was this same kind of belittling. Don't you waggle your brain. And exactly along those terms that Nitu just pointed out, that somehow you're fortunate, but actually you're not really a designer. So I'll skip through the pernicious outcomes and the key examples, because they have already mentioned them. They will get more time later. Fantastic little story there about the strong female character in Mass Effect, then leading to them using her in there's a little competition to see how she should be, whether she should be scantily dressed or not. There's the horrible story that Jen and Suzanne already talked about. I'll skip over the Jennifer Hepler debacle, looking at that in detail, but it is a really interesting example that's getting a lot of time out in the ether at the moment, and has produced some really interesting responses, not just negative ones. I think we can use that kind of energy that's come about in response to that. The thing that we need to understand, that I think Jen and Suzanne have also pointed to, is that this isn't taking place in some sort of little vacuum where the games industry is a sort of special case, and nor is the excuse that this is just the opinion of 14-year-olds, grow up, don't worry about the fact that they're sexist, and develop a harder skin. There are fundamental underpinnings that are culturally pervasive. This isn't just the industry, the games industry. Women are objects, they're technically backward, their brains are different and therefore incompatible with the demands of serious technical positions in the games industry or technical positions in the world. And they invite derision and harassment by their provocative behaviour and their general ineptitude. And the cross assault horror story, does everybody know the cross assault story? So I won't go into that in tremendous depth, but I will let you have the link to it, because it makes really, really terrifying viewing. This is a channel dedicated to the broadcast of fighting games called Cross Assault. And there are sort of nearly an hour's worth of footage of this young woman called Miranda, aka Superman, being subjected to some of the most horrible and ritualistic sexual harassment by this guy Aris, who's on her team. And he's coming over and he's sniffing her. What he's supposed to be doing is responding to the chatter from the online and live audience.